This is continuing from the Gemara before, where there was a machlokes between Rabbi Yitzchak and Rabami regarding the par, the bull that the Kohen Gadol brings in Yom Kippur. And the question is, what happens if the Kohen Gadol shechted his par, and then he passed away, and now there's another Kohen Gadol that's coming to take him over? So there's a machlokes. Could he use that par that was already shechted from before, or could he not? And the basis of the machlokes is, it says in the pasuk, "B'zois yavai Aaron al hakodesh b'par." You have to have a par to come into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. What does that mean? Do you have to have a live par that you are shechting to bring inside? Or no, when the Torah says b'par, it refers even to a par that was already shechted, and you're only using the blood to take inside. Okay, so Rab Ami says that b'par means a living par. Rabbi Yitzchak says, no, when the Torah says b'par, it doesn't have to be a living par. It could even be just the blood of the par. So now, Rabbi Yitzchak asks Rabami, and he brings other psukim where you see that the expression of par could be even a par that was already shechted. So he asks him, the pasuk it says, "V'hoitzi eskola par." This is talking about a different carbon. I think it's talking about a par helem davar. There's a par that it says in the pasuk, what do you do with the remainders of the par after it's shechted? You don't burn it on the mizbeach, but it's taken all out mechutz lamachne. So the Torah uses the expression kol hapar, even though this par was already shechted. So I see that the term par could be referred to even a par when it's not alive anymore. So this is a raya to what Rabbi Yitzchak said, that over here as well, par means after it's shechted. So the Gemara answers, no, over here when it says kol hapar, what it means is sheyoitzi es kuloi. It's saying you should take out everything, whatever is left of it. In other words, they shecht it, they do the zrika of this carbon, and then whatever is left of it, so the focus in this pasuk is the word kol hapar, the entire par. But this is not a raya to any other time when the Torah uses the word par, that it means that it's not alive already. The Gemara brings another pasuk. He asked him from this pasuk. It says, "Vespar achatos ve'es si'ir achatos." And the continuation of that pasuk is, so it says, "Ashehuva es dama l'chapa b'kodesh yoitzi al mechutz lamachne." You should take out mechutz lamachne, and they should burn it over there. So over here as well, the Torah refers to a carbon after it's shechted with the term par. So I see again that it's considered to be a par even after it's shechted. So why can't the new Kohen Gadol take over the par that was shechted from the previous Kohen Gadol? So Rav Papa answers and says as follows: when you have the leftovers of the par after the shechita, and you have the hide, the flesh, and the intestines, the kula alma pligi, no one will argue that this could be called par, because this is most of the body of the animal. Ki pligi, the machlokes are between Rav Yitzchak Nafcha and Rav Ami, whether the second Kohen Gadol could take over from the first Kohen Gadol, bedam. The question was, could he take the blood and go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Just the blood. Could the blood be called par? Marsav adam mikri par. So Rav Yitzchak that is holds that the blood is called par. Umar Savar, and Rav Ami says, Dam lo yikri par, just the blood of the par. It's not even any part of the actual body, like the flesh or the intestines and so on. So therefore it's not called par. That's their machlokes. Omar Ravashi says, Mistavle Kamando Omar, it's logical to say like the one that says that Dam ikri par, that the blood is called the par. Because what does it say in the pasuk over there in Yom Kippur? Bezois yavai Aaron el hakodesh. This is what is coming inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The par ben bakar, and the Torah says he should come inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim with the par ben bakar, with the bull. So now, how do you learn this pasuk? Atu bekarne ma'ayale? Is he taking the bull by its horns and bringing it into the Kodesh HaKadoshim? So what does it mean when it says that he goes inside with the par? Ella, what does the pasuk mean? Bedamai. He's only taking the blood inside. And the karile par, and the Torah says that he comes inside with the par. So I see that even the blood is called a par. Ve'edoch. Now, according to Ravami, that says no, that the word par in the pasuk does mean the entire bull. What is it? How do you read the pasuk? It doesn't mean he takes in the par. Bameh huchshar aren lova el hakodesh. What prepares him to be able to come into the Kodesh HaKadoshim bepar ben bakar lachatas, with the full live animal of a par ben bakar that he brings into the azara, and he shechts there, and then he takes the blood into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So when it says in the pasuk par ben bakar, it's referring to the live par ben bakar that he brings into the azara, that then is machshir him. It prepares him to be able to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Okay, so this concludes the rayas that the Gemara brought to both opinions regarding this question whether a new Kohen Gadol could take over the par that a previous Kohen Gadol had shechted and he died in the middle of Yom Kippur. But now the Gemara has another question which brings us into a whole long discussion here. But there's another problem over here, which is the chatos shemesu balehi. This par, what is it? This par is a carbon chatos. And this carbon chatos is being brought for who? For the Kohen Gadol. And now this Kohen Gadol that designated this par for himself died. And what's the halacha by any carbon chatos that the owner of the carbon dies? The rule is chatos shemesu baleh. A carbon chatos that the owner dies, lemisa azla. It goes to misa. This is a halacha l'moshe misinai. There are actually 5 different cases of carbonis that if they die, there's 5 different cases that they can't be used. You have to leave it to die. Lemisa asla doesn't actually mean that you have to kill it, but they put it in a room and let it die. One of them is a chatas shemesu balel. Once the owner dies, now this carbon chatas can't be used anymore. So if so, this carbon, it's already dead. I mean, the Kohen Gadol shechted it already. But the point is, it can't be used anymore. Just like a chatas shemesu balel can't be used over here as well. Once the previous Kohen Gadol passed away, so now it can't be used anymore. So why are we even discussing whether the second Kohen Gadol could take it over or not? So Rav says to Rav as follows. Omri Talmidach, your student said that Rav Amram explained, Chatos tzibur hi. This chatos, this par that the Kohen Gadol is bringing for himself, it's not considered to be a chatos of an individual. It's considered to be a chatos of a tzibur. Because this chatos is not only being brought for himself, it's being brought for himself and also for all of the Kohanim. We learned before regarding the vidui. He's mizvada. He confesses not only for his own averis, he confesses the second time for himself and for all his brothers. So it's a chatas for a tzibur. And therefore, v'loy lemisa azla. Since it's a chatas of a tzibur, so therefore it does not go to misa. It does not die. Now, the rule by a tzibur is, a tzibur, there's no this cloud that we said, that once the owner dies, the carbon can't be used anymore. If it's a chatos, that's only by an individual, but not by a tzibur. And over here, this belongs to a tzibur. Now, where do we see that the par on Yom Kippur is considered to be a carbon tzibur, not a carbon yachid? And this is going to be the discussion of the next section of the Gemara here. What exactly, how do we define this par that the Kohen Gadol brings? Is it a carbon yachid? Is it a carbon tzibur? And the Gemara then actually has a third option to say that maybe it's neither. Maybe it's a carbon of shutfim, of partners. So the Gemara starts with one raya from a Mishnah or a Braisa that's brought in Masechta Tumura regarding the par that the Kohen Gadol brings. And over there, the Gemara starts in the middle of this Braisa. What it says in the beginning of that Braisa is, the Tana Kama says the following rule. Any carbon yachid is not doiche Shabbos and is not doiche Tumah. But any carbon, that's the sikha, exactly. But every carbon tzibur is doiche Shabbos and doiche Tumah. That's the rule that Tana Kama says. Amalei Rab Meir. So regarding this rule, Rab Meir says, I have a question to you. There's the par that the Kohen Gadol brings in Yom Kippur, and there's also the carbon chavitim, which is the mincha that a Kohen Gadol has to bring every single day, including Shabbos, and also Pesach, the carbon Pesach, the carbon yachidu. All these 3 are carbon yachid, v'deiches Shabbos v'esatumah, and they all push off Shabbos and Tumah. That's the question that Meir asks to the Tana Kama. So how can you say a rule that a carbon yachid is never going to be doiche Shabbos or Tumah? Here you see 3 examples that are exceptions of that. So now the Gemara explains. So what did the Tana Kama hold? Lav, doesn't that mean Miklal, the Ikkel, Amanda Omar, that there's the other opinion, which is the Tana Kama, and he says, the Tzibur, that these 3 karbanos are considered to be a carbon Tzibur. So that's the argument between Rab Meir and the Tana Kama. Are they a carbon Tzibur or are they a carbon Yachid? So as you were mentioning, this is a sikha where the Rebbe speaks about this bariches. The Rebbe there specifically focuses on the carbon Pesach. What is the carbon Pesach? Is it a carbon Yachid or is it a carbon Tzibur? There's aspects of carbon Yachid, the fact that every person has to bring his own carbon with his own group and be counted on it and eat it. And then it's a carbon Tzibur because all Klal Yisrael comes at the same time together in the Beis HaMikdash. So that's the basis of this argument over here. Is it a carbon Yachid or a carbon Tzibur? So the Kitzur, the point the Gemara here is saying is that we see that the Tana Kama held that it's a carbon tzibur. So therefore, once a Kohen Gadol dies, another Kohen Gadol could come and take it over. You only can't take over a carbon chatos when it's a carbon yachid. But here, the Tana Kama holds it's a carbon tzibur. But the Gemara doesn't accept this raya. The Gemara says, if this is your raya, that probably the Tanakama is arguing with Rab Meir. So if so, Diktani, we also learned in a Braise that it says, Oh, Malay Rab Yaakov. Rab Yaakov said to the Tanakama, what was the other part of the rule of the Tanakama? The Tanakama said that every single carbon sibur is Deiche Shabbos and Deiche Tumah. So Rab Yaakov asked on that, V'halei par helem dovar shel tzibur. A par helem dovar is when a Sanhedrin paskin something that there's a chi of koris, and Bezna was materit, and the whole tzibur was over on this. So the whole tzibur has to bring a carbon. Or seirei avedis kechavim. When the tzibur served the Avodah Zarah, they have to bring a soar as a chatos. The chagige, the carbon tzibur. And also a chagige on Yontiv is also considered to be a carbon tzibur, which will be explained later in the Gemara on the next daf. So these three are a carbon tzibur. The aim deichen loisa Shabbos v'loisa tumah. And they're not deichen, not Shabbos, and not tumah. That was the question that he asked. Rabbi Yaakov asked the Tanakama. So now, how are you going to understand the Tanakama's opinion? Based on what you said before, are we going to say here similar, that Miklal, the Ikelam, the Omar, the Yochid, that if so, we have to say that there's a Manda Omar. In other words, the Tanakama here holds that these Karbanis are a carbon Yochid? You can't say that. These Karbanis are definitely a carbon Sibur. Maybe even again to the question that Rav Meir brought up, the Parya Mekipurim, the Chavite Kohen Gadol, and the carbon Pesach, maybe there you could say that the Tanakama held that they're a carbon Sibur. But regarding the question of Rabbi Yaakov, these three Karbanis are certainly a carbon Sibur. So you can't say that the Tanakama argues and says that they're a carbon Yachid. So therefore, the way to understand this, both the questions of Rav Meir and Rav Yaakov on the Tanakama is as follows. They're answering, they're asking on the Tanakama. The Shamei, they heard that the Tanakama said, the Ka'ama, he gave the following rule. Carbon Tzibur, Deiches Shabbos V'Satumah. If it's a carbon Tzibur, it pushes off Shabbos and it pushes off Tumah. The carbon Yachid, ain't a Deiche Loisa Shabbos V'Loisa Tumah. But if it's a carbon of an individual, it does not push off Shabbos and it does not push off Tumah. That was the rule that he gave. On this, they asked him, you can't give such a rule. There are exceptions to this. Amalei Rab Meir. Rab Meir says, I'll bring you an exception of a carbon Yachid. Carbon Yachid, Klalu, are you telling me that every carbon Yachid is not Deiche Shabbos? The Halei Parya Mekipurim, Chavite Kohen Gadol, Upesach, the carbon Yachid, they are a carbon Yachid. The Deichen is a Shabbos is a Tumah. And all three of them are Deiche Shabbos and are Deiche Tumah. That was his question. So you have an exception regarding the carbon Yachid. Amalei Rab Yaakov, carbon Tzibur, Klalu, Rab Yaakov says, I'll find you an exception regarding your rule regarding carbon Tzibur as well. The carbon Tzibur, these three are a carbon Tzibur. And they do not push off Shabbos or Tumah either. So I see that the rule you gave, the distinction between a Yachid and a Tzibur, whether it pushes off Shabbos and Tumah or not, is not the right rule. Elo, so therefore what Rav Meir says is, I'll give you a different rule. The rule is supposed to be as follows. If you have a carbon that has a set time when it's supposed to be brought, then it pushes off Shabbos and Tumah as well, because it has a set time. You don't have a chance to bring it any other time, so you can't push it off. Even if it's a carbon brought by an individual, a carbon that does not have a set time, so then it will not push off Shabbos or Tumah, even if it's a carbon tzibur, because you can bring it another time. So therefore the Gemara is saying that the raya that was brought here from this whole discussion, that the part of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur is considered to be a carbon tzibur, is not a raya. Rav Meir calls it a carbon yachid, and probably the Tanakama agrees to that as well, that it's called a carbon yachid. It doesn't make sense to say that the Tanakama argues in that. So even if his answer is a correct answer, but he definitely does not have any raya from this braise. And therefore Rave, which is the one that was asking this question, entertains the possibility to say that the par Kohen Gadol of the Payam of Yom Kippur in the Kohen Gadol is a carbon yachid. So Rabbi now asks on Rav on this, I'll bring you another braise where you clearly see that the par of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, there's an opinion that's saying that it's a par, that it's a carbon tzibur. What does it say in the braise? Par v'sa'ir shel Yoma Kippurim. The bull that the Kohen Gadol brings for himself, and the soir, which is brought as a carbon chatas for Klal Yisrael of Yom Kippur, she'avdu, they got lost. And then the hifrish acherim tachteim. And then you brought, instead of them, another part, another soil. And then you found the part and soil that got lost. What happens to them? Kulam yamusu. They all have to be left to die. This is also part of that halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that once you brought another carbon, so then if you found the other one, so it has to be left to die. V'chein, the same halacha applies also. Sirei avodas kechavim shavdu. The sirim that are brought for chatos, for serving avodah zarah, when the tzibur served avodah zarah that was lost, and the hifresh acherim tachteiim, and then you found the original carbon, kulam yamusa, they all has to be left to die. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon Oimrim. Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon says, Yiru achi yistavu, you don't leave them to die. This is not part of this halacha l'Moshe Sinai that it's left to die, because that halacha l'Moshe Sinai that it's left to die is only if it's a carbon yachid. And these are not karbanis yachid. So therefore, rather, what do? You don't need them anymore. You already brought the carbon. You had another one instead of them. So what do you do with them? Yiru achi yistavu, you leave them to graze until they get a blemish. And then the yamachru, they're sold. And the yiplu d'meim l'nedava. And the money of these karbanis will be brought as a carbon nedava in the Beis HaMikdash. What's the reason? So Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say, she'ein chatos tzibur meisa. A chatos of a tzibur is not left to die. Even after it's not needed anymore, whether the owner died, whether another carbon was brought in its place. But if it's a chatos tzibur, it's not left to die. So right here, you have clearly Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon saying that these karbanis are karbanis tzibur. What was the first one mentioned in this braisa? The par. The par of Yom Kippur is a carbon tzibur. Amalei, so Rava answers, no, you're reading the braisa wrong. My par, when it starts off in the braisa speaking about a bull, it's talking about par, helen, dover, shal tzibur. It's talking about the carbon that's brought when the tzibur was over on a isakaris because the bezin was matted for them. It's not even talking about the par of Yom Kippur at all. But the Gemara asks, how could he say that? It clearly says in the Braisa the part of Yom Kippur. So the Gemara says, no. We could say, ki ketani. When it says we're talking about Yom Kippur, ad the sa'ir. That's going on the sa'ir, on the goat. You have to read it separately. There's the par, that's one thing. And that's the par helam dover shel tzibur. And then it says sa'ir shel Yom Kippurim. It's two different things. But the Braisa here is not talking about the par of Yom Kippur. But the Gemara now brings a clear Braisa where it spells it out. But we learned in the Braisa, par shel Yom Kippurim, the par of Yom Kippur. V'sa'ir shel Yom Kippurim. She'avdu, they got lost. V'hifresh acherim tachteiim, and you brought another one, and now you found the original carbon that got lost. Kulam yamusu, they all are left to die. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon Oimrim, they said, Yiru achi yistavu, you leave them to get a mum, and then the yamachru, they're sold, v'yiplu d'meim l'nedava, and their money is brought as a nedava. And they say, she'ein chatas tzibur meisa, because a chatas tzibur does not die, is not left to die, and these karbanas belong to the tzibur. So this braisa is very clear. This braisa says the par of Yom Kippur, according to Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon, is called a chatas tzibur. So Rava before said that, no, I don't accept the answer that the par of Yom Kippur is called a carbon tzibur. But right here you have a clear braisa that both Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon say so. So the Gemara says, Loi teime, this is what the problem Rava had was. Loi teime she'ein chatas tzibur meisa. In this braisa here, don't read it when Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon are saying that it shouldn't be left to die. They weren't saying that it's a chatas of a tzibur. Rather, ela eima she'ein chatas hashutfin meisa. A chatas brought by shutfin cannot be left to die. This halacha l'Moshe Sinai that it has to be left to die is only if it's from one individual, not from shutfin. And over here, the part of the Kohen Gadol in Yom Kippur is not a part of a yachid, because it's not only for the Kohen Gadol himself, it's for his brothers, the Kohenim as well. But it's also not a part of a tzibur, because a tzibur, Rashi explains, is only considered to be an entire shevet. And this is just for his brothers, the Kohenim. It's not even for the entire shevet Levi. Rather, what's the definition of this carbon? It's considered to be a carbon of shutfin. And a carbon of shutfin is also not left to die. Okay, so now basically what this means is, going back to the original discussion, the Gemara's question over here was, how could one Kohen Gadol take over the par that was shechted by another Kohen Gadol if he died? Once he dies, isn't that par totally useless? You can't use it anymore. So now, according to what the Gemara is saying, Rava will agree to the original answer that was given. What was the original answer we gave? That this par is really a par of a tzibur. So therefore it's not left to die. Only the par of a yachid is left to die. Now Rava agrees to that answer with one distinction. Rava says it's not a par of a tzibur, it's a par of shutfin. It belongs to not only the Kohen Gadol, but it also belongs to the brothers, the Kohenim. and therefore you can take over that par from the Kohen Gadol. It doesn't have to be left to die. Okay. Now the Gemara asks, if Rava agrees to the original answer, just with this one distinction that it's not called a par tzibur, it's called a par of shutfin, so amay nafkamina. What's the difference? You're calling it of a tzibur, if you're calling it of shutfin, whether it's from a tzibur, whether it's from shutfin, it has the same halacha that it doesn't have to be left to die, and the next Kohen Gadol could take it over. So the Gemara answers, yeah, you're right. For this par of Yom Kippur, there's no nafkamina, but the nafkamina will be the loimaisu kayanim par b'hoira. The nafkamina will be regarding another halacha, regarding the halacha of hoira. What's this halacha of hoira? This is what the Gemara in Hoiriyah speaks about. The Gemara in Hoiriyah speaks about a case where a bezdin paskins a din, and all of the tzibur accepted this heter of the bezdin, and really it was something which was totally aser. That's when you have to bring a par helim davar shel tzibur. Now, what defines tzibur? When do you say that you have a tzibur that has to bring this carbon? When you have at least a shavit, a whole shavit that was over. It doesn't have to be all the Klal Yisrael, it has to be a full shavit. Now, the question is, what happens if a bezdin paskin a certain halacha for the kohenim? And all the kohenim were over this halacha. Are the kohenim called a tzibur or not? That's going to be the machlokes here in our Gemara. According to the opinion that calls the par of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur a par of a tzibur, so all the kohenim are also called a tzibur. Even though they're not a full shavit, but they're called a tzibur. Right? Mashenkin, what Rava is saying is, the Kayanim are definitely not called a kahal. Even if all the Kayanim accepted this heter and were over on this, they cannot be called a tzibur. And Rashi says the reason is because a tzibur or hakahal is only referring to those people in Klal Yisrael that receive a nachla on Eretz Yisrael, an inheritance in the land. And the Kayanim don't. So therefore they're not called a tzibur. So the only nafkamina between Rava saying that they're shutfin and the Abaye that said that it's a tzibur is going to be regarding this halacha if they're called a tzibur for this halacha that they have to bring a par helam davar shel tzibur.
Because you think that tzibur is everybody in the ear.
Okay, in the city. Okay, what is that? Okay, could be. Gemara now, yeah. They don't have any any nachla in Eretz Yisrael. Toshana. The Gemara continues now with this discussion whether the part of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur is of a tzibur, is it of a yachid, is it of shutfin? So Toshana, the boy Rabbi Lazar asked the question as follows: The divrei oimer par Yoma Kippurim carbon yachid. According to the opinion that said that the par Yom Kippurim is a carbon yachid. So there's definitely one opinion that says that. We had before Rab Meir. Rab Meir referred to the par of the Kohen Gadol as a carbon yachid. Right? There were other opinions that argued. Rabbi Lazar and Rab Shimon refers to it as a carbon tzibur, but Rab Meir says that it's a carbon yachid. So now the question is, oise tmura or eina oise tmura? Could you have a tmura of this carbon or not? By every carbon that an individual designates as a carbon, if he then comes and says, I want to exchange this animal with something else, so then that other animal also becomes a carbon. That's the concept of tmura. But tmura only applies to a carbon yachid. There is no tmura by a carbon tzibur. So now the question is, the part of the Kohen Gadol, according to this opinion, it's a carbon yachid. Could he make another animal as a tmura to also become holy like this animal or not? And the Gemara will soon explain this machlokes. So now the Gemara says, Lav, don't you understand from this question, Meklal, that I can prove from here, the Ikkel Amanda Amar the Tzibur. There's another opinion that says that this part of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur is called the carbon tzibur. So Rabbi Lazar is asking the question, according to the opinion that calls it a carbon yachid, whether you can make a tmura or not. What does it mean, l'divrei ha'omer? But there's another opinion that says that it's a carbon tzibur. Not like what Rabbi said, that it's not, that there's no carbon tzibur here. So the Gemara answers, loy, that's not what you should be medayik here. Meklal, the ikalamam da'ama, the shutfin. There's another opinion that considers the part of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur to be a carbon of shutfin. And there's no din of tmura by shutfin either. And therefore, according to that opinion, you certainly can't do tmura for this part. His question is only according to the opinion that it's a carbon yachid, could you make it a tmura or not? And now the Gemara will focus on this. So this segues into another discussion here. So let's take a look at this question itself now. Boy, Rabbi Lazar asked this question. The opinion that says that the part of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur is considered to be his personal carbon. Could he make a tmura for this carbon or not? Now, what's the basis of the question? What is he asking? So simply, it seems that his question is as follows. Do I look at the one that designated, that sanctified this carbon, and that's only one person? The Kohen Gadol is the one that sanctifies this carbon, so therefore it's a carbon yochid, so he could make a tmura. Or do we look at who the carbon is being used for? The kapara of this carbon is being used not only for himself, it's being used also for all his brothers, the Kayanim as well. And if so, it's a carbon of shutfin, or maybe even a carbon of a tzibur. And therefore there is no tmura for this. Tmura is only for a carbon of a yachid. So the Gemara says, no, that can't be the basis of his question. Because pshite, it's obvious, the basar miskaper as linon. When it comes to the halacha of Tmura, we always look at who the carbon is being used for. We don't look at the one that designated, that was makdish the carbon. And the Gemara brings a proof for this. Amar Rabavo, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Rabavo, in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, said a few halachas. One halacha he said is regarding a case where you have, let's say, Reuven being makdish an animal for Shimon. Let's say Shimon had to bring a carbon chatas, and Reuven is being makdish the animal for Shimon. And now they want to redeem this animal. So what's the halacha regarding redeeming kachim? So it says in the end of Parshas B'chokaisai, when the owner himself that redeems kachim wants to redeem, he has to add a fifth. When someone else comes and wants to redeem the kachim, he does not have to add a fifth. So therefore, the Rabbi Yechanan said, Hamakdish, the person that sanctified this animal, even though he didn't do it for himself, he was doing it for his friend, but he's the one that was makdish it, Maisav Chaimish. If he wants to redeem it, he's going to have to add a fifth. The hamiskaper, okay, that's the first halacha. Whereas the person that the carbon was sanctified for him, if he wants to redeem it, he does not have to add a fifth. Rashi here brings the pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'im hamakdish yigal," then he has to add a fifth. The makdish has to add a fifth, and not the person that the carbon was designated for him. A second halacha he says, "V'hamiskaper oisaba tmura." The one that the carbon was designated for him, he is the one that could make this animal a tmura to make another animal holy. The one that was makdish the carbon cannot make a tmura because it's not considered to be his anymore. He was makdish it for the purpose of someone else. That person, it becomes his. He is the one that could make the tmura. So right here you see clearly Rabbi Yechanan said when it comes to the halacha of tmura, you go according to the person that the animal is designated for him, not the one that was makdish it. A third halacha he said, if you're taking trumas and maisris from your own produce for the produce of your friend, toivas hana shaloi. The toivas hana is yours. What's toivas hana? Toivas hana is the choice that the Yisrael gets to choose to which kain he's going to give it to. Even if he's paid off for this, he can get paid off for this in order to give the truma to a certain kain. Who's the one that gets to choose who to give it to? The one that was makdish from his produce, not the person that it was done for him. As Rashi here brings the sources from a pasuk for this. So the point is, we're bringing here Rabbi Yechanan for the middle halacha that he said, that tmura follows the person that the kapara is for. If so, coming back to the part of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur, the kapara of this carbon is for all the kainim. So if it's for all the kainim, shouldn't it be obvious that this carbon is a carbon tzibur, or at least a carbon of shutfin? So why should there be any svara to say that you could make tmura for this? So therefore the Gemara now explains Rabbi Elazar's question differently. So it's obvious the basam is kapara zlina, that by tmura we follow who the kapara purpose is for. And the following was the basis of his ibaya. The brothers, the kainim, that are being atoned in this carbon, are they established, is their kapara established in the carbon as much as the atonement is for himself? The kapara is for him and his brothers, the kainim, together. That's one way to look at it. Or perhaps bekufye miskapri. Their kapara is just floating. That's the translation of the word kufya, floating. What does this mean? The main kapara of this part is for the Kohen Gadol himself. Like you see, the first time the Kohen Gadol confesses on this carbon, he talks about his own avedas. The second time, he comes and adds also his brothers, the Kainim, he sort of includes them in his own kapara. But they're just sort of floating. They're not the main kapara. The main kapara is for himself. So that's the basis of Rabbi Elazar's question. We know that Tmura follows who the carbon is being brought for. But the question though is he really the main kapara and they're just floating along with him? Or no, all the brothers of the Kainim, their kapara is part and parcel of this kapara. They're established in the kapara as much as him. So the Gemara here brings a braisa to prove this Toshama. We learned in a braisa where it says, Chaymer bezavach me betmura. There's a certain stringency that a carbon, in other words, the original carbon, has over the tmura, which is that exchange, that second, the tmura. And v'chaymer betmura me bezavach. And then there's also a stringency that the tmura has over the original carbon itself. And the Braisa explains. And one of the details in this Braisa is going to be relevant for our question here. Chaymer bezevach, the stringency in the original carbon is shazevach noyig b'yachid ki b'tzibur. The original carbon is both yachid, by a yachid, and by a tzibur, which the Gemara will soon explain. The Gemara will focus on this point. And also, v'deiches ha-Shabbos. The original carbon pushes off Shabbos by a carbon tzibur, v'esat tumah, and it also pushes off tumah when it's a carbon tzibur. V'oise tmura. And the original carbon, if it's a carbon yachid, so then it makes a tmura. That carbon yachid, if a person exchanges, he wants to exchange, it becomes a tmura. That's the chumrah that you have by the original carbon. Masha'en kein b'tmura, so none of these stringencies will apply to the tmura. On the other hand, chayme b'tmura mi b'zevach, there's a stringency that there is by the tmura that you don't have by the original carbon, and that is shatmura chala al bamum kavua. When you try to exchange your original carbon with another carbon, so the tmura, the kedusha of the tmura, takes effect even on an animal which is a bamum kavua. It has an established mum that's not going away. If you're makdish, a behemoth, which is a bamum kavua as a carbon, the kedusha doesn't take effect. But by the tmura, it will take effect. And also, and as a result of this, if you're going to want to redeem this tmura now, to take it out into chulin, it will never fully go out into chulin. It will never go out to chulin that you'll be allowed to shear the wool and work with it, because the halacha is any carbon that had a kedushas haguf, that the body was already sanctified to be a carbon, even if you redeem it, it doesn't become fully chulin, because it has the kedusha on its body. And therefore, even after it's redeemed, you can't shear the wool, you can't work with it like a regular animal. So that's regarding the tmura. Mashen came bezebach, which is not the case by a zebach. If you're what happens if a person is makdish a behemoth, which is a balmum? The kedusha doesn't take effect on the body. It can't become a carbon because it has a mum. But it has kedushas damin. It becomes kaddish for its value, for its money that's used for bedek kabayis. So then if you redeem it, it goes out totally to chulin. Okay, this is the Braisa. Now the Gemara is going to focus on the first part of the Braisa. What did it say there in the beginning? That the chumrah that there is by a carbon is that there's a carbon yachid and there's a carbon tzibur. It's deiche Shabbos, it's deiche tumah, and it could also make a tmura. So the Gemara wants to know, Hai zevach heichi domi. This carbon here, what are we talking about? Ilay med yachid. Are we talking about a carbon which is a carbon yachid? Midachi Shabbos v'tumah. Is it deiche Shabbos and tumah? How can we say that the stringency of this carbon is that it pushes off Shabbos and tumah? If we're talking about a carbon yachid, it's not deiche Shabbos and tumah. Elo de tzibur. So rather, you're going to tell me this stringency of this carbon that we're speaking about is a carbon tzibur. Mi yaiset tmura. But if we're talking about a carbon tzibur, is there a halacha of tmura regarding a carbon tzibur? So we can't be talking about a carbon tzibur either. So what's interesting about this Braisa, the problem the Gemara has is, the Braisa is saying that here you have a carbon that has the stringency of being deiche Shabbos and tumah, and it also has the stringency that it could make another tmura, but it doesn't go together. Only a carbon tzibur is deiche Shabbos and tumah, and only a carbon yachid could make a tmura. So what are we talking about? Elo, the Gemara says, Lav, isn't the case here the par, we're talking about the par of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur, v'doiches HaShabbos, v'doiches v'esatoma, and this part of the Kohen Gadol is considered to be of a yachid, but it's doiches Shabbos and Tumah, the kviyah leizman, because it has a set time when it's brought, and therefore it's doiches Shabbos and Tumah, v'oiset tmura, but at the same time it could also make a tmura, the carbon yachidu, because it's considered to be a carbon yachid. This is the specific case we're talking about, the par of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. So this would answer the question of Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar wanted to know whether with the par of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur you can make a tmura. Seemingly that is the case that this Braisa is speaking about. Right, and therefore the Kohen Gadol, the brothers, are just floating along with his kapara. So Rav Shesh's answer is, not necessarily is that the case. Maybe he's talking about be'eloi shel Aaron. Besides the carbon chatos that Aaron brought for himself, he also brought a ram as a carbon oila. And maybe that's the one that we're saying is considered to be a carbon yachid, and there's tmura for it, but it pushes off Shabbos and Tumah because it has a set time. So, but we don't know yet about the par. And he explains, Hachanami mistavre, it's logical to say that we're talking about the carbon oila, the ram, which is an oila, because if you're going to say we're talking about the par, which is a chatos, so then what would that mean? Tmura, the par, Shabbos, v'tumeh, huduleidachis. So what are you saying? That the tmura of this kind of a carbon, the tmura of a chatos, will not push off Shabbos and Tumah, right? That's what the Brisa was saying. The original carbon pushes off Shabbos and Tumah. The tmura of this chatos does not push off Shabbos and Tumah. Huduleidachis, it cannot push off. Ha-b'chayel makriv, kreva. Are you saying though that this tmura could be brought as a carbon? The tmura of a chatos could be brought as a carbon, but that's not true. Ha-tmuras chatos hi. It's a tmura of a chatos, and the halacha is tmuras chatos lemisa ozla. The tmura of a chatos cannot be brought as a carbon; has to be left to die. This is one of the 5 mentioned before. Just like we said, the owner of a chatos that passed away, the carbon has to be left to die. This is another example. The tmura of a chatos cannot be brought as a carbon b'chlal. So therefore he says it's logical to say that we're not talking about the par, which is a chatos, because then it won't fit into the brisa. We have to be talking about an oila, and then we could say that the tmura of a oila is brought as a carbon. The tmura of a chatos is not brought as a carbon. The Gemara says, no loy, la'olam paray. Maybe we are talking about the par of the kohen gadol, which is a chatos. Umay tmura, when the brisa said tmura, what does it mean tmura? It doesn't mean tmura of this chatos. Shame tmura. It's talking b'chlal about the concept of tmura, not specifically of this carbon. Any tmura that it could be brought as a carbon. So the Gemara says, Ihachi, if so, zevach nami. So when it says in the brisa zevach that there's a chumrah regarding the original carbon, shame zevach. Why won't you say that when it says zevach, it's not talking about one specific carbon? The whole premise of our Gemara was trying to figure out what's that one specific carbon, which is a carbon yachid on one hand, but at the same time it's deicha Shabbos and Tumah. And therefore we said either it's the part of the kohen gadol or it's the oil of the kohen gadol. But why can't we say that when it says zevach, it's not talking about one specific carbon? Maybe when it says zevach, it's talking b'chlal about karbanis. There's a carbon yachid, there's a carbon sibur. So the Gemara says, no, shame zevach loy katani. When it says in the brisa zevach, it doesn't mean any kind of a carbon. How do I know? Mimai midiktani, because it says in the brisa, chaymer betmura, the stringency of the tmura is shatmura chala al bamum kavua. That the tmura, when you're makdish a tmura, it takes effect even for a balmum. And then when you redeem it into chulin, it will never go out completely to chulin to be shared and to be worked with. And we said that as a stringency of the tmura in contrast to the zevach that will go to chulin. Now, if you're going to tell me we're talking about any karbanis, when it says zevach in this brisa, we're not talking about one particular carbon. My zevach, shame zevach, when it speaks here about karbanis, it's speaking about all karbanis. So then how could you say that this is not true by chulin, by other karbanis, that is? When it says in the brisa shame zevach, if it includes all karbanis, that would include a b'chayr and a meiser. And a b'chayr and meiser, they do become completely kadosh, a kedushas aguf, a real kedusha, even if it's a baal mum kavua. So therefore, how could you say that they're different than Tmura, that they will not go out completely to Chulin? They should have, they do go out completely to Chulin, that is. They should have the same halacha as the Tmura, that it does not go out completely to Chulin. Ela Shem Zevach Loikatani. Shem Zevach is not saying the Brisa, it's talking about one particular carbon, so it's either the power of the Chatos of the Kohen Gadol or the Oila that the Kohen Gadol brings on Yom Kippur. Okay.
This issue with a shavet is called or